Hi, this is Jen Strouser. I'm here to teach you how to make windows to my heart, my new pattern. The one behind me I made for a magazine, Sewing Mag, and it was fabric given to me by the Clever Quilt Shop. It's very cute. Today we're going to make a version of it with Farmhouse Reds from Moda. It is designed by Minnick and Simpson. It's really cute. It's just red, white, and cream fabrics, and they sent me a layer cake to use. They were very generous. And I also have border fabric. So this is for my border and binding. This is for another border, and then I have backing fabric too. So this is on Moda Bake Shop. If you want to get a copy of the free pattern, it's modabakeshop.com. Also, if you go to my website, dizzyquilter.com, there will be a link there. So our first step is to gather our layer cake and sort it. We're going to use these 10-inch squares from the layer cake, which are pre-cuts. They're fun to use, and if you're a beginner, it saves a lot of time. It saves a lot of time for everybody, but you don't have to worry about getting your block perfectly square because they already did it for you. So what you'll start with is 40 of these 10-inch squares. If you don't want to use a layer cake, don't use what you have in your stash. It's fine. So you'll start with each heart. Each of these hearts starts with two 10-inch squares of fabric. You choose one for the heart and one for the background. Sometimes I'll get the terminology confused because it's actually on top. It's a 3D technique. If you've ever seen anything with cathedral windows, it's a similar style of creating this shape. So we will start with one of our heart pieces. And I'm going to change my camera angle so you can see what I'm doing. But what you do basically is you start with a solid background heart, a square to make your heart. You applique on some triangles around the edge, and then you have this heart shape, and it's three-dimensional. I don't know. I'll show you after I've sewn one. But the flap here kind of opens, so it's fun and it's easy, and you get this curved look without having to piece any curves. And I will get my stuff together, and we can make one together. If you go to Moda Bake Shop or dizzyquilter.com, you can print out a PDF. And that's helpful because there is a diagram in here with fabric placement. So this is our heart. This red piece will form the heart in the block. And what I'm going to do is take it, let's see if we can shift everything over a little bit. I've been working ahead, like the frugal gourmet. You're going to take it, and I press them right sides together, and it doesn't have to be a really sharp crease. What this is just a registration mark for you to line up parts later. So I've gone ahead and I've done that to all 20 of my hearts, and they are going to wait now for the next steps. So you're going to take, I like to do my cutting since I have to cut 20 blocks out here. I like to press my pieces first, and I like to line them up. I like to cut all at once. So if I have 20 pieces, I know I can cut through 5 layers of fabric pretty easily without making any mistakes, and that way it saves a little bit of time. Cutting 5 sets or 4 sets is easier than cutting individual things 20 times. So I like to line them up and press them, and that way they stay together a little better, although this pattern is quite forgiving. So if things aren't perfect, it is okay. It's still going to turn out looking like a heart. Let's move that aside a little bit. So my 10-inch squares of layer cake that are going to be the background, I put on my cutting mat, and I cut. So I cut them in half. So I have a Creative Grids ruler. When you're using your rulers, if you're a newbie, and even if you're just not paying attention, it can be easy. This kind of ruler has the measurements start with whole inches on this side, and on this side they start with halves. And I do use it both ways, but I have to be especially careful, particularly when I'm talking, that I do it correctly. So I cut my 10-inch square in half to get 2 5 by 10-inch sections, and I'm going to turn my ruler and line up so that I cut another Cut that one in half too, so that we have 2 sets of 5-inch squares. And just to keep myself organized, I'm going to separate these because I do want the background on each heart block to match all the way around the heart. I don't think that's crucial, but that is definitely how it has to be on my project. So I'm going to keep those together, and then I'm going to take this section and I'm going to cut off a segment that is 2.5 inches. So I'm going to flip my ruler over to get to the 1/2 inch lines. And if your ruler doesn't measure this way, it's okay. It'll still work. But mine does, and I like that feature. So that one section that I cut, it was 2.5 by 5, and now I have 2 sets of 2.5 inch squares. And again, I'm going to sort them to keep it organized. And the last 2 pieces actually on here match, so I'm just going to leave them together. I have 2 of the same square. A lot of times in layer cakes you'll get 40 pieces of fabric, and there will be duplicates within there. So the next piece, the last piece for the heart, it measures 3 by 5.5. So I am going to cut across like this at 3 inches, and then I'm going to turn my ruler and line it up at 5.5 inches. Make sure everything's nice and square, and cut off this. Now these 2 little sections are waste. I have some ideas for what we can use that for later for another project, but they don't get used in this quilt. So that is all the cutting. Next, we get to press them. So let me look at my diagram. So when you look at the block diagram, and I'll put one up on the screen, you have your A section is this piece that we've already pressed. It's the background. This is part A of the block. This is part B, these rectangles. These are C, the smaller squares, and the larger squares are D. I am going to take one matching set of each. So I'll have one block A, one rectangle B, 2 C's, and 2 D's. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my D blocks and press them on the diagonal. And we press them wrong sides together because that is going to show in the final block. I'm going to press this one too. Alright, let me get this out of the way. I'm afraid it might be too confusing. So my D's are pressed in half. I'm going to do the same thing with C. I'm going to fold them in half on the diagonal, wrong sides together. Give them a nice press so that they'll stay for me. And set them aside. Now this is the B block, or the B section, and this is a little bit more intense. So I'm going to fold up one of the long edges about 1/4 inch. And once again, this is a forgiving pattern. If you're off either way a little bit, it really doesn't matter that much, but try for about 1/4. Try to keep it straight. And then you're going to take these sides, the short sides, and fold them up to the middle. And I'll change the angle on that in a second. But first I'm going to press it. And what you want to end up with, I guess it's like a prairie point. I've never made prairie points. So I have a piece like this. So I have a triangle that can point down into the center of my heart, and the edges are all finished for me to tinker with. And the way I got it was I started with a rectangle, and I folded the bottom up to give a finished edge down here, and then I folded the edges in and up like that. So maybe not a triangle, like a flying geese shape almost. So that's how you form that rectangle piece. And I do have more photos on my website if it's easier for you to watch and follow that way. So here is the heart. And first I'm going to place my pieces on it. This is the B section that we did, and I'm going to put it down so that it's solid up. The folded side is on the back. And I'm going to line it up along raw edges, aligning, and the point should match in that center. And I'm going to pin that in place so that it stays. Now the rest of them, I have that was B. These are C, and I'm going to put them on the edge here. Raw edges aligned with raw edges, and the folded part, the folded edge to the interior of the heart. So they all line up. And then I'm going to put block D, or piece D, on the edge there, and there. And so you can see you have a heart shape. I can pick this up. And that's a straight heart shape. And that's fine. And you can find lots of blocks where you can piece those together if you like that way and not have the additional layer of fabric in there that's, I guess, kind of wasted. So I'm going to pin these in place so that they don't wiggle about. So the next step that I'm going to do is I am going to take these to my sewing machine after they're pinned and stay stitch around the outer edges. And what that means is I'm just going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch in from the edge. What my goal is to keep these pieces in place until I put the quilt together. So I don't want the stitching that I do next to show in the finished quilt. So if you have junk thread that you want to get rid of, you can use it for that. Sometimes that's what I do when I have a half a spool left of something weird that I used for quilting or thread painting. Alright, and I do maybe go overboard on pins, but I want everything to stay nice and flat for me. So, alright. So everything is lined up and pinned, and what I'm going to do, here I'll show you that, is I'm going to take it to my sewing machine, and I'm just going to start, let's see, does that make sense? I'm going to start here, and I'm going to stay stitched down along the edge, all the way around, making sure that none of these flip up. Just when I get to them, I'm going to slow down and make sure this corners stay there. I'm going to keep stitching all the way around until I have the whole thing fastened down. Okay, I'm at my sewing machine now. I'm trying to get my stuff, keep it tidy. And I'm going to do my stay stitching, in case you didn't understand what I was talking about. So this is my 1/4 inch foot, and if I wanted a 1/4 inch seam, I would line up my fabric along this edge. This little dot, this little bump in here, I don't know if it's 1/8 of an inch. It looks like it's pretty close. I try to get under there, so basically in between that dot and the end of my foot. That way I know that my stuff will be caught in the 1/4 inch seam. And I'm just going to stitch around the perimeter of the block. And I think it sounds like my machine would really like some oil. So I'll try to do that before the next step. But so when I went around the corner, I just dropped my needle and turned. I'm going to raise my foot up a little bit and just make sure everything is lined up nicely. One of my pattern testers was a little disappointed that there are not the nice sharp points at the bottom of the heart that there could be. And that would be nice, but it won't work with the way that I'm making these with one layer cake each, unless I had to trim down the original, the larger background piece. Which is a cute idea, and I might pursue that again later. But just being, just so you know, there will not be sharp points at the bottom of your heart, and or at the top, some of your curves are going to get sewn out flat. My goal with this was to make a quick, easy quilt that had a heart shape with more of a curve than the traditional pieced ones. And that's what I've got. So it's more hearty, but not perfect. So I'm going to let that be. I can get pretty fiddly. It's certainly easy to drive myself crazy. Okay, put that up on the machine, and because I am a compulsive stitcher, I try to keep all my little, I try to trim all of my little threads so that they don't come through my seam allowances and bug me when I'm trying to quilt. Alright, I've stay stitched my heart block down, and it's, you know, it's got all these straight lines. And what I want to do is I'm gonna start at the bottom, and I'm gonna slide my fingers in. There's this pocket from the folded fabric, and I'm gonna turn it back, just like if you were doing a cathedral windows. And I guess, let's see, I want to get a nice gentle curve, and it's because it's biased the way that I folded it, it does curve. And I would say that that is coming out between 3/8 and 1/2 inch, this depth. And what I like to do, I had somebody who tried my pattern suggest pressing it, and that's actually a really nice way to get it to hold down and not be so fiddly. What I do is I like to drop in some pins. You don't have to use a ton. Certainly you can use less than I do. And that just keeps the little folded edge turned back. And thank you, Yolanda, for recommending pressing. That is a nice way to do it. So I actually don't measure. I don't even bother trying to get them exactly even, because I think that since I'm not really tugging on it, it is pretty even. And if it's not, that's okay with me too. This is not one of my projects where I need to have everything be super precise. I certainly have those projects, but this isn't one of them. And so I put a pin through the very point of section B and get it really locked down in place, because I want to make sure that that stays. Because I want that point there right in the middle of the heart, nice and sharp. Now I've got that. And you just keep going all the way around. It's the same thing. Actually, let's try Yolanda's trick and give that a little press. Maybe it'll behave a little better. One thing is, if you're pressing with your pins in, if you don't have glass head pins, be careful. I have these are plastic, and some of them are flat because I have pressed them and they melted. Which isn't a big deal, but it's a surprise the first time. So, on the smaller pieces, you don't fold back as far because it pulls the fabric a little bit more. And they really kind of want to pop open. So we'll give that a quick press. And it's not necessary, I didn't do this at all on the first quilt, but it does look like it might be an improvement on my technique. But you can see after I stitch it down, now it's a rounded heart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it back to my machine. I'm going to load this in my machine. I have some cute variegated red and white thread, and I'm going to stitch around the outline of the heart to keep it in place. So let's go to the sewing machine. There we are. Okay. Alright, so I'm at my machine. I've threaded my top thread with the red and white variegated because that thread is going to show. So I'm going to start right here at the edge. And first, actually, I'm going to start in the seam a little bit and stitch a little bit before I get to the heart because I want to make sure that I'm not going to come unsewn. So I'm just going to start and catch the very edge of the of this folded over bit to stabilize it. And I'm going to go around slowly, turning my piece. I like to have, I don't know if you can see it, I have the folded edge here right up against the edge of my 1/4 inch foot. So I am just barely catching the edge. And it's not really important where you stitch. If you decided you want to have your stitch line come around this edge instead of this one, that's fine. It's your quilt. You do what you want. I happen to like the way it looks this way. I always seem to like to butt things up into my machine this way so that whatever I'm lining up lines up along this edge of the foot, that edge of the foot. I don't usually put my blocks on the inside of the machine, if that makes any sense. So it's easy enough to just keep going right around the whole quilt. I pull out my pins before I get to them. When I was a new sewer, I sewed over pins, and sometimes it's fine, and sometimes you hit the pin, and you break a pin, and you break a needle, and you can throw your machine out of time. I don't like doing that. Okay, and I'm just going to kind of sew towards the edge there. You can just keep sewing up that way. I don't do that. So just keep going around. And try not to catch yourself too much on the pins. Okay. So this little section is a little more complicated, but not by too much. I just try to keep pushing down so that I'm getting my folded piece right up against that last pin. And this one's going to get folded under too. So it's kind of pulling them together. And I go slowly there and kind of hand crank it right to the edge. And pull out that pin because now that fabric is sewn in place. Turn my piece so that I'm going down again. And then, there you go. I caught it. Now I tack it down. Pull out my pin. Every once in a while I lift up my presser foot and readjust. And then there you have it. Block is stitched, and see, it's nice and round. It's not one of those squared off hearts. I'm going to press it a little just to set it and kind of get rid of that crease in the middle. It goes away with quilting. See, but isn't that nice? And it's three-dimensional. There's a little bit of fabric over here you can fool with. I know when my kids were little they would have played with that all the time. But it's still open. And I was a little concerned when I designed it that it would be really heavy in the quilt because there's this extra fabric in the sides. Because this is 3 layers here. And it really is not a problem at all. So that's the heart. So I'm going to, off camera, finish that process for the other 19 hearts that I've chosen, and then I will come back and we will look at laying it out on the design wall and assembling your final quilt. And I'll show you how I quilted mine. Just wanted to briefly show you how I keep organized after I cut my squares, because that might be a little overwhelming. I do my first block in any pattern. I do my first test block, and that when that comes out the way I like it, I go ahead and I cut the rest of my pieces. So for this one, these are all of my D's, and they're all together. After I cut the stack, I sort them out. So each one of these is a pair of different fabrics. Here are my B pieces, and here are my C pieces. Again, sorted and stacked in pairs. After I press them, I put them in groups like this. So there are the 2 D's, the B, and the 2 C's, and each group has that together. So that when I put them together with my heart, I can just pull one and then pull one of these that I like, and everything is together. I don't have to go sorting through a massive pile and try to make pairs again, because I don't like to play memory matching anymore. I don't have little kids anymore, and it wasn't fun to begin with. So this is how I keep myself organized. So, and then here are all of my A's. So I'll just, match one of these with one of these stacks and then put it together. And I can do it this way. I can do all of the steps all at one time. It saves me some time. I like to chain piece. That's one of the ways that I'm as fast as I am. So there you go. Keep it organized.